Check one, check two.
Check one, check two. Check,
Okay, so,
check one, check two.
okay, that's good. Let's get going. Okay, okay. You need to hear, you need to get to this. Oh, this can log in, this needs to log in. This also.
Already. Yeah, it's, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Could you just give a few minutes? I need to code. I think I need to code is.
Is there anything else you need me to do?
1 second, Dr.
Oh, okay, sure.
Roughly 10,000 people have congregated here in Gary this weekend of weekends.
I am a black man. I want a black party. I do not trust white Republicans or white Democrats.
Nothing will be solved by emotionalism without substance. All in favor.
We are a mighty nation.
Action is here.
We walk in unity.
It's gonna be a different day. We have arrived.
For every murdered martyr, 500,000 have come to take their place, and our spirit remains unconquered.
This is the nature of change. That it must seem jagged and convulsed, but remain the smooth speed of universal wisdom.
This document tells you why the man owes you reparations. Here, honey, you want reparations? Take it. This is reparations.
Those of us already disenchanted with the political system could conceivably turn to other tactics, shattering the quiet routine of daily life in this country.
Revolution is about the right for humanity and black people in this country here and across the world to survive.
When we come together, what time is it? When we respect each other, what time is it? What time is it?
The early 70s saw a collective outrage in the black community after years of discrimination and the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. And those events prompted black leaders from differing political ideologies to come together to try and reach a consensus.
It led to an historic gathering of black leaders in which they tried to channel that rage into political action. As WGN's Tanya Francisco reports, it took place in our neighboring city to the east, Gary, Indiana.
I remember that it was a lot of people at Westside.
Westside High School in Gary, Indiana was the hub of the black universe in May of 1972.
I remember the signs telling where people were from: Mississippi, Michigan, Indiana.
Some even came from as far away as Hawaii, Florida, and California.
Too many people have their eyes on Gary today.
A young Karen Freeman attended with her parents.
Even as a 12-year-old, I understood what they were talking about.
We must emerge from this convention with an independent national black political agenda, a dynamic program for black liberation that in the process will liberate all America from its current decadence.
The National Black Political Convention was hosted by Gary Mayor Richard Hatcher, one of only 2 black mayors of a major city at the time. He volunteered after no other city was willing to host the 10,000 attendees.
The convention will come to order.
The convention was organized by poet and activist Imamu Amiri Baraka and Congressman Charles Diggs Jr., the leader of the newly formed Congressional Black Caucus.
When we got there, it was just high energy.
David Greaves was a 26-year-old videographer and editor working with his father, William Greaves, to produce an 80-minute documentary on the 2-day convention called NationTime.
It could be thought of as a radical way, but as a very straightforward way, talking to black people about black interests.
The convention attracted black leaders with vastly different political ideologies, like Coretta Scott King, Malcolm X's widow Betty Shabazz, and Black Panther co-founder Bobby Seale.
And we don't want just no words, we want some action and support.
And celebrities Harry Belafonte, Isaac Hayes, Richard Roundtree, and comedian and civil rights activist Dick Gregory, who was in the midst of a fast protesting the Vietnam War.
That's what this convention is all about, getting our minds together.
But one person missing was Shirley Chisholm, who was making her historic run for president as the first woman and African American. She decided to skip the convention when organizers couldn't decide if they would endorse her candidacy.
This document tells you why the man owes you reparations.
More than 3,300 delegates from just about every state in the country tried to reach a consensus around a black agenda on issues like affordable housing, improved health care, a guaranteed minimum wage, political representation, and many other pressing concerns.
We demand the eradication of heroin from the ghetto, now eating away at the vitals of black youth.
Reverend Al Sampson was one of those delegates.
It was a convention full of tension because people needed attention. And the value of the convention was folk came together and folks stayed together. And that meant people had to listen to each other.
Tension ran so high, at one point, part of the Michigan delegation, led by Coleman Young, who would go on to become mayor of Detroit, walked out.
It was really like putting together an orchestra. And the discussion and the tension was the script.
What time is it? When we come together, what time is it?
A young Reverend Jesse Jackson fired up the crowd with chants of NationTime from Imamu Baraka's poem on black nationalism.
I am a black man. I want a black party. I do not trust white Republicans or white Democrats.
Northeastern Illinois University political science professor Bob Starks.
Black nationalism does not espouse black supremacy. It just simply says we want to be free, we want to control our community.
In later years, Reverend Jackson moderated his position on black nationalism and even mounted 2 runs for president in 1984 and 1988. But activists today are taking a cue from the '72 convention.
The Black Lives Matter movement is one of the things that came out of this whole convention. The idea that you continue protesting, because one of the demands on the part of the nationalists is that you never give up. You continue to fight.
Organizers also credit the convention with helping to almost triple the number of black elected officials in the country.
There was a group of youth that were inspired as a result of that '72 convention. Certainly I was one of them, but there were others.
Freeman Wilson would go on to become mayor of Gary from 2012 to 2019. Today, she's president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League.
I thought a lot of seeds had gotten planted. The genius of the convention was that people went away with a whole lot of information that they didn't have.
Glad that it has resurfaced now.
The film NationTime, once considered too militant to be released, was recently uncovered in a Philadelphia warehouse, digitized and re-released in the midst of yet another highly charged political environment.
Every time I ask people, have they heard of the Black National Convention, they never heard of it.
Angela Ford recently uncovered several photos taken by an unknown photographer at the convention. She has posted them on her website, the Obsidian Collection, Digital Museum of Black History.
What it does is it allows a new generation to tell our stories. As we organize and deal with the politics of today, it's important they understand what successes their elders had and how they did it.
What time is it?
The convention adjourned without reaching a consensus, but a committee later published a 68-page national black agenda, which called for, among many things, more black representation in Congress. Other smaller black national political conventions were held years later, but none had the crowds or the impact of the '72 convention. Tanya Francisco, WGN News.
Very informative.
Impactful.
Thank you for that, Tanya.
Good afternoon. It's a real honor to stare out and see this audience of elders all the way to first-year students and people from the community. My name is Michael Ralph. I'm the professor and chair of the Department of African American Studies. And I just want to sort of welcome you to this 50th anniversary celebration and commemoration of the 1972 Gary Political Convention, which really was the idea of Dr. L.C. Scott, director of the Ron Walters Center. And in a minute, I'll bring our provost, Anthony Wuto, to the front just to say a few words as the kind of intellectual architect of our university. And I think just quickly watching that clip and being reminded of the significance of this event, I'm sure we would agree that, you know, this university, like that convention, has a range of political positions and political projects. And yet, you know, it's a real testament to the esteem and commitment of the university that we're having this event here and that we're sort of reinvigorating, reinaugurating that conversation. So I look forward to your questions, comments, insights about what's at stake. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Anthony Wuto to say a few words.
Good afternoon. I want to first acknowledge Dr. L.C. Scott and for organizing this event and also acknowledge the 10th anniversary of the Walters Center. I know that Ms. Scott is not with us, but she's, I believe, watching and has dialed in online. I wanted to just share something. I was having a conversation with Dr. Joe Leonard and sharing with him one of the things that I was trying to think through was what I was doing in 1972. And maybe I'll just age myself now, but in 1972, one of the things I remember, I was in first grade, and one of the few things I remember about first grade is we had a weekly reader. Each week you would get a weekly reader, and the weekly reader I remember distinctly because it was an election year. And I remember getting a weekly reader, and there was a campaign button that each of us could cut out. And so there was a campaign button for Richard Nixon, and there was a campaign button for George McGovern. But I also remember watching the news and hearing about Shirley Chisholm. I didn't know who she was. I knew she was important. I knew she was a political figure, but she was not in my weekly reader. And so I thought that was interesting. And I was sharing with Brother Carr. I know that he's a student of history. I didn't hear about this convention. I was not aware of it until I came here to Howard University. But I had researched and found a statement from the convention that they had produced that I thought would be interesting if you would allow me to just read. And again, it just brought to mind the more things change, the more they remain the same. And so it said, the Black agenda is addressed primarily to Black people in America. It rises naturally out of the bloody decades and centuries of our people's struggles on these shores. It flows from the most recent surgings of our own cultural and political consciousness. It is our attempt to define some of the essential changes that must take place in this land as we and our children move to self-determination and true independence. And then it goes on, our cities are crime-haunted dying grounds. Huge sectors of our youth and countless others face permanent unemployment. Those of us who work find our paychecks able to purchase less and less. Neither the courts nor the prisons contribute to anything resembling justice or reformation. The schools are unable or unwilling to educate our children for the real world of our struggles. Meanwhile, the official approved epidemic of drugs threatens to wipe out the minds and strengths of our best young warriors. Economic, cultural, and spiritual depression stalk Black America, and the price for survival often appears to be more than we are willing to pay. Isn't that something? Could you just take those comments and put them in a publication today, and you wouldn't tell that 50 years had passed. So I just wanted to welcome each of you to this event, especially our students, for being here. Again, as I mentioned, I didn't even know or hear about this event taking place until I came to Howard as an adult, as a professional working adult. And so I just acknowledge you for your interest and desire to learn more about what took place then and how it is impacting our society and our world today. So again, thank you, Dr. Scott, for organizing this event. I don't think I'll be able to stay for the comments from Professor Crooms Robinson and Brother Carr, but I'll watch them on film. Okay, thank you. Oh, one other thing, and I'll leave this with Dr. Scott. Our Office of External Affairs is making available for our students 2 books, Blessed Experiences, autographed copy from Congressman James Clyburn, and the 1619 Project, which I believe is also autographed. Okay. Maybe, okay. We'll get it autographed, but I'll leave them with Dr. Scott.
Thank you, Provost Wuto. So next I'd like to introduce our interim chair of the Political Science Department, Clarence Hussein, and then he'll give it over to the moderators once he's finished.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So also let me begin by thanking Dr. Scott and her team for pulling this together. This is such an important educational expression. As was mentioned in the film and has been mentioned by the provost, it's a forgotten convention, similar to the conventions that took place in the 1800s. If you take classes in political science, you take classes in Afro-American studies, you will learn about these conventions, but that doesn't happen all across our campus, and it certainly doesn't happen around the country. So I just can't underscore how important it is to grasp this history and the importance of bringing individuals like Dr. Fuller to our environment. So I'm going to read my introduction because I want to not make any mistakes and to respect Dr. Fuller so that you really know what he's been about. It is just really a pleasure and an honor to introduce someone that I've known about for decades. I was well aware of his contributions to the National Black Political Convention, as well as his other endeavors. Dr. Fuller has a distinct and accomplished career as both an academic and an activist for civil rights, racial justice, and educational equity. In the 1960s and 1970s, Dr. Fuller, also under the name of Owusu Sadaki, was central to key iconic institutions and movements in Black history. He and his colleagues formed Malcolm X Liberation University in Greensboro and Durham, North Carolina, which existed from 1969 to 1973, and Dr. Fuller served as president of that historic institution. In 1971, after spending nearly 2 months in Mozambique, where he was meeting with leaders of Black liberation movements, he came back to the United States and with some other colleagues formed the African Liberation Day Coordinating Committee. In the vein of the great Pan-Africanists such as W.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey, the ALDC will go on to regenerate interest and solidarity in the United States for African liberation. This is before we even get to the National Black Political Convention. Dr. Fuller was paving the way. He became superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools from 1991 to 1995. He's the founder and director of the Institute for the Transformation of Learning, which began in 1995 to provide quality education options for students from low-income families. The Dr. Howard Fuller Collegiate Academy, which is a charter school in Milwaukee, is named in his honor. Dr. Fuller retired from Marquette University in Milwaukee in June of 2020, where he is now a distinguished Professor Emeritus. Dr. Fuller received his Bachelor of Science degree from Carroll College, his MSA degree from Western Reserve University, and a PhD from Marquette University. At the time of the Gary Convention, he was one of the foremost advocates of Pan-Africanism in the United States. And as we saw at the convention, included Betty Shabazz, Dick Gregory, Harry Belafonte, Coretta Scott King, Bobby Seale, Jesse Jackson, Queen Mother Moore, Ron Dellums, Charles Diggs, who was my congressman at the time, and it also included Brother Howard Fuller. With no more further ado, let me introduce Dr. Fuller. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. So it really is an honor and a privilege, really, for me to take part in this particular program this afternoon. I did want to say a couple things to get started. First of all, I'm still Owusu Sadoki. I saw they said formally. I don't know. I know what that means, but I still use both names. So I just wanted to say that. The second thing is I wanted to say it was a great privilege and honor for me to actually work with Ron, with Dr. Walters. We worked on a lot of different things over the years together, and I just want to acknowledge that. So one of the things that just got mentioned that I thought was really important is that the 1972 convention came out of a history of Black people holding national conventions. And the first one actually was held, I think about in 1839 or something like that. And the purpose of that particular convention was they were having a discussion about Black people leaving the United States and immigrating to Canada because of the oppression of Black people. And so they actually created an organization called the American Society for Free People of Color. So I'm saying that because over the years, as was mentioned, Black people had been holding conventions, and particularly in that 1800 period, leading up to the Emancipation Proclamation and afterwards, because in 1869, there was a national convention held to support the Freedmen's Bureau, to call for a national tax for Black schools, talking about opposing the colonization of Black people, calling for universal suffrage, and opening up of public lands, particularly in the South, and giving those lands to Black people. So I'm saying all that to say that there was a precursor conventions to the Gary Convention. Let me tell you what my role was in the convention, and let me tell you what I thought the major problems were or struggles were. So I did participate on some of the national meetings to organize the convention. And really I have to give props to Amiri Baraka and to Mayor Hatcher for providing the co-leadership for bringing the National Political Convention to life. But what I did was I participated in those national meetings to actually form the convention. And then I was the leader of the delegation from North Carolina. And what that meant was I recruited people to come from North Carolina, but I also convened a state meeting so that we could get our issues and stuff together to bring them to the National Convention. So I wanted you all just to be aware of that. So let me tell you what were the sort of issues that came out of the convention. So I came to the convention really, as I said, as the leader of North Carolina, and we really were focused on 3 issues. Number one, we wanted to have an independent Black political party. So if you listen very carefully to Jesse, when he was talking about he didn't support white Republicans, white Democrats, I mean, if that was true, then what were we supposed to do? Well, what we were supposed to do was to try to create an independent Black political party. But if you listen to what Mayor Hatcher said, he said an independent Black political agenda. And that really will tell you what the main split was at that convention. Because there were people like me who didn't care anything about Republicans and Democrats for real and thought that we should create an independent Black political party. So that was and I want to talk to you about why I think that didn't happen. The second thing that we were there to do, at least from North Carolina, but other delegations as well, was to condemn what we call the Iron Triangle. And the Iron Triangle was the United States, Israel, and South Africa. And we wanted to condemn them for apartheid in South Africa. And back then, and even now, you couldn't criticize Israel because you would then be characterized as anti-Semitic. I've never been anti-Semitic, but I never understood why you could not criticize policies that were being pursued by Israel and the United States and South Africa and not be anti-Semitic. So that was the second thing. The third thing is I was the chair of the African Liberation Day Coordinating Committee, and we were planning a demonstration in DC on May the 27th in support of African liberation movements. And that demonstration actually happened. And we brought somewhere between 40 and 60,000 Black people, mainly Black people, to DC to march in support of African Liberation Day. So I was there to make sure that that African Liberation Day got into the discourse and that, we were making sure that people knew that the demonstration was going to happen. Now, the reason why I think some of the major splits occurred is that when the Democratic Party heard that we could potentially create an independent Black political party, it was all hands on deck, man. They had all of their operatives. They had Black people who had a commitment to the Democratic Party before they had a commitment to Black people. And their job was to make sure we did not create an independent Black political party, because they saw that as being a way to draw votes away from the Democratic Party that Black people were holding allegiance to. The second thing is that there were a number of Black people there who also had commitment to labor unions. And so they didn't want anything to go down that in any way would bring shade onto labor unions. And the labor unions, of course, were hooked up into the Democratic Party. And then there were different front groups that were there representing the Democratic Party. Because to be honest with you all, man, it was like an atrocity that we didn't support Shirley Chisholm. But we could never get unity on supporting Shirley Chisholm because you have so many Negroes who were tied up in the Democratic Party. And so their job was to make sure that A, we did not create an independent Black political party, and B, that we did not throw our support for Shirley Chisholm. So there were a lot of things going on in that convention. And I thought it was a great event. I mean, Imama Baraka was like just phenomenal keeping the convention going, because there were so many different splits, so many different ideas, so much going on. But just to bring that many Black people together and to talk about issues affecting the Black community at that time, I thought was significant. So I just wanted to open it up with those comments. And I think I'm now open to any questions that people might have.
Good deal. All right. Can Dr. Fuller hear us?
I can
Fuller,
hear you.
if you can hear me. Hello?
I can hear you.
Very good. Okay, so we might have to listen very closely. I'm Greg Carr. I work in the Afro-American Studies Department here at Howard. And before I say anything else, I think Dr. Fuller might not bring this up, but if you get a chance, get his memoir, No Struggle, No Progress. He goes into great detail into all of these things and more. So we're going to open it up about 15 minutes of questions. And Dr. Fuller, I'm going to go right here in the front if you want to say your name, brother, and he can hear you. Oh, I thought you had your hand up.
No, I do, but
Yeah, stand up for the camera, because I suspect Mrs. Walters and a bunch of other people watching, right, Dr. Scott?
Hi, my name is Zion Eldridge. I'm a freshman political science major from Youngstown, Ohio. My first question is, when you're talking about the Black Revolution in the 1970s, as a political science major, I'm really confused, because when you talk about like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon only lost 2 states. It was like Massachusetts and something else, and then Ronald Reagan only lost Minnesota in '84. So when you're studying Black power, right, Black power, Black political power was at its highest in the 70s and 80s, but candidates who were not for Black people did their best in those eras too. So what's kind of, how did that work, and how, you know, why weren't we really going to the polls in 72 and 84?
Appreciate you, brother.
Well, first off, brother, I honestly don't understand the question that you just asked me, but I'll do my best. Black people were not supporting Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan in any kind of massive way. Although Richard Nixon did propose a program of, I guess they call it Black capitalism, I think the way that it was characterized. And there were some Black people who moved over to support Richard Nixon, but Black people, for the main part, were in support of the Democratic Party. And so when you ask me, you know, why is it that this happened in the period that you use, why is it that these people who didn't support Black people got elected? My question to you is, why is it that people will get elected today who didn't support Black people? How did Donald Trump get elected? How did any of these people get elected? And so the reality of it is that electoral politics, at least in my view, have never been the main vehicle for Black struggle. I think it is a vehicle, but it's never been the main vehicle. And so I'm one of these people who believe that it's the people's struggle, and a lot of that takes place locally and so forth, that has advanced our interests. I don't think that electoral politics, writ large, has ever been the main vehicle of struggle for Black people. Although clearly people who get elected pass laws, but the question is, what is it that impacts those people to do anything for Black people? And I'm a firm believer in Derek Bell's concept of interest convergence theory. And that is that Black people have been successful when at different points in time, for different reasons, our interests converge with the interests of certain white people in power. And the issue always has been, how do we promote our interests in a country that fundamentally was never set up for us to be successful? So I think when you look like me, brother, some young brothers are going to stand up and ask you the same question.
If there's still a country, Baba. All right, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Fuller. My name is Justina Blanca. I'm a senior political science major, African American Studies, and philosophy double minor here at Howard from Prince George's County, Maryland. And so my question for you is a bit of a thought experiment. You talked about the tragedy of not supporting Shirley Chisholm and the fact that we did not form a Black political party after the Gary Convention. If we did support Shirley Chisholm and if we did create a political party, what do you think would have been different in the decades that followed?
I honestly don't know the answer to that, sister. I'm one of these people, I find it very hard to speculate on about, well, this would have happened or that would have happened. I honestly don't know. Whether we would still be in the same position we are in today, I honestly can't answer that question. But what I do think it could potentially have done is it could have been a stronger galvanizing force for Black people, both at a local level, a state level, and a national level. But I honestly cannot tell you what I think might have happened had that occurred. I wish I could, but I can't.
Dr. Fuller, as I pass the microphone for the next question, maybe you might have some comments on what happened in the immediate aftermath. I know by '74, for example, in Little Rock, the Congressional Black Caucus had pulled out. Electoral politics seemed to be safe in hand. And even as thousands of Black people were elected to state, local, and federal office, we do see that the Democratic Party apparatus, Republican apparatus, pretty much had survived the Gary moment, seems, except maybe at the local level. Dr. Pierre?
Hello, Dr. Fuller. My name is Natalie Frederick Pierre. I am both an alum and assistant professor here at Howard University. I have two questions for you. Well, a compliment. One, thank you for sharing your insight about the deliberate diffusion of Black political power at the convention. So my first question is, how did the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa figure into these politics? And my second question is, I noticed that your school academy is on your shirt and on the billboard behind you. So the second question is, how does the legacy of that convention or this type of Black politics funnel itself into the curriculum of your school? Thank you.
Let me answer the second question first. First of all, I want to thank you all for your questions. And if I don't do a really good job of responding, I apologize for that. But I try not to say stuff that I don't believe or I don't know anything about. So let me respond to the second question first. The Gary Convention doesn't funnel into our school at all, honestly, my sister. I mean, I bet if you went around we have 325 Black kids, 9th through 12th grade in this school. I bet if you went and asked them, there wouldn't be 10 of them who would know what the Gary Convention is, honestly. And the only reason they would know it is that we do teach Black history in our school, but there are areas of Black history that don't get touched. And I think one of them is the Gary Convention. It's just like, for example, one of the reasons that kids in our school know about Claudette Colvin is because I've made it a part of my life to not let young people live and think that Rosa Parks was the only one who was arrested, and particularly to talk about Claudette Colvin. But I doubt that very few kids in this school know anything at all about the Gary Convention. And honestly, I'm not sure long-term what impact the Gary Convention had on the politics that you are currently facing today. I really wish I could answer that better, but I really don't know the connection between what we tried to do in Gary and the struggles that you have to face today in this world that you're in. So that would be my answer to the second question. Could you tell me the first one again real quickly?
So you discussed the factionalism at the convention.
Oh, yeah.
So I was wondering if the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa or other Black separatist parties, peoples had at the convention.
No impact really, honestly, other than, they were there. And what I mean by that is there were so many different factions and people represent different groups and so forth. And again, there were probably a significant number of people at that convention who knew nothing about the Republic of New Africa. Some of us did by virtue of being activists during that period. But you gotta think about coming to a convention where you had like activists, you had people who were engaged in traditional electoral politics. You had some people who were there representing nonprofits. The value of it was, it brought Black people together from so many different, quote, walks of life. But what that also meant is that there were various organizations and individuals and movements that large numbers of people knew nothing about because they had never reached the stage of mass consciousness. So I don't think entities like the Republic of New Africa had any real impact on what did or did not happen in Gary.
Dr. Fuller, I'm passing the microphone to Baba Aduno, but as I do, I want to ask you just to follow up as Dr. Pierre just asked, two very specific instances you've written and really spent most of your life devoted to local power, whether it be Durham or of course there in Milwaukee. I'm thinking very particular about the fact that you talked about electoral politics as a tool, not the destination, but a tool. And in two instances, one, the son of Amiri Baraka, Ras, of course, at Howard University, who's current mayor of Newark,
right.
and his comrade Chokwe Antar Lumumba, who is the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi right now, and very much shaped by the politics of the RNA. Of course, his father, coming out of Detroit, it was in Mississippi. Rosa Parks, John Conyers, all that, they made that possible. Any thoughts on acquiring local political power and how, while Gary may not have created an agenda that we stand on today, some of the influence of some of that thinking might be on display in Newark and Jackson, respectively? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, brother, because, I mean, you know, there is this statement that all politics is local. And to a certain extent, that's true, but to a certain extent, that ain't true. But I think the examples that you gave are really good ones, and I'm glad you raised it with Roz and then with Chokwe's son, because obviously both of them were raised in families that were activists. And so ultimately, I know that they came out of their childhood with a lot of different types of ideas that ultimately led them to where they are today. I mean, I've had conversations with Roz since he became the mayor, but here's what I want you to go back and think about is that William Jewis Wilson wrote this book called The Declining Significance of Race. And one of the arguments that he made in that book, and he was condemned for it by nationalists and so forth, but he never said race wasn't critical. But what he was trying to say is that for a lot of Black people, their class status was going to be a greater determinant of what happens to them than their race. And another point that he made in that book was that Black people were going to become mayors at the point in time where there were no economic, there was very little economic base for them to use to support the needs of the people. And as a result, there was the danger of Black people becoming cynical about Black mayors because these mayors were unable to deliver because of the economic circumstances that they were inheriting in these cities. And so it'd be interesting to talk to Roz and to Chokwe's son and to other Black mayors out here today about what are the primary problems facing them as they try to wrestle with real problems that people have on a day-to-day basis.
Since the protocol has already been set, Brother Dr. Owusu Sadadoki, I bring you greetings from the Colorado Black Caucus of Representative Regis Groff, and I also bring you greetings from the Houston, Texas, Dawulu Gene Locke.
Yeah.
And as a young teacher at the Muhammad University of Islam in Denver, Colorado, starting in 1971. However, these institutions were established in 1934 to have some semblance of teaching our own, for our own, in our own. And to be brief, I want to say, what is the role? I have a picture here of Ella Josephine Baker. And I also have a picture of Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, who also played basketball at Rankin High School in Pennsylvania. And what is my question? My question is, how do you want to do what you want to do when you have not been nurtured and taught sufficiently to put into practice your objective, your purpose? I listened very closely to your three areas that you talked about, that triad. How do we push not only HBCUs, but how do we push historical Black high schools to teach us what we need to do for ourselves? And it would be remiss. What is the role of the politics of the political party of the Honorable Marcus Mosias Garvey in the United States and in Jamaica and in Europe and on the continent of Africa's impact of not only Gary, but of the Congress of African People in 1970, the Labor Day weekend, because some of us were there as students like you are. I'll stop there, but always giving honor to Almighty God and the noble ancestors. And I should have asked you, may I have the privilege to continue to speak, Dr. Fuller? I hope that doesn't convolute too many things, but when we really want what we want, we're going to have to work for it and sacrifice it. Independence or other than independence? Thank you.
That might be the answer. Can you hear us, Dr. Fuller?
Yeah, I just didn't hear a question, so I didn't respond.
Oh, I got
So it was cool.
I
I mean, I get it.
I think you're going to let your testament speak for itself. Man, I ain't seen one of them in a long time, Bob, but that was pretty good. I'm going to turn to Dr. Luzane.
Did you?
Oh, I thought you didn't have your hand.
I did, but I thought she was first.
Y'all be the last two. Okay. Or either one. You want to take it home?
I let her take it home. All right. Just really quickly. So a number of people have raised the question about, I have a quick comment and a question. So a number of people have raised questions about why wasn't there a black political party? Actually, there was a black political party. NBIP. One of the things that came out of the National Black Political Assembly, as Dr. Foley talked about, one branch went off into the Democratic Party. They went there. Another branch actually tried to keep the movement going, people like Ron Daniels and others. Yep. So there were follow-up conventions, 74, 76, 78. And at one of those, there was a vote to launch a national black independent political party. And in 1980, I was there. We had a convention in Philadelphia. One of the key leaders of that was Ron Walters. Dr. Walters was here at Howard. Dr. Walters wrote the charter for the National Black Independent Political Party. It was that experience that 4 years later has Dr. Walters leading the program and policies for Jesse Jackson to run in 1984 and 1988. And it was the Jackson campaign that laid the groundwork for Obama. So there's a line that goes from National Black Political Assembly all the way to Obama. And so we have to do that kind of history. The black political, the NBIP is more obscure than the Black Political Convention because it had, its impact wasn't social mediaized, right? So it's lost, again, unless we teach it, unless we talk about it, unless we move on it. My question is along the lines of, in 1972, there was a lot of inexperience. The Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. We're talking only 7 years later, where still very few black elected officials, black people still struggling to vote in the South. So it's understandable that the confusion around what the potential for the Democratic Party might be kind of was out there. But here we are 50 years later. There's much more experience. So the question of how do you get movements like Black Lives Matter, which is much more mature than in many ways what the experiences were, because we learn from history, but we also get black elected officials who also hopefully have learned from that history as well and aren't as naive about the Democratic Party or about electoral politics. How do we, in this era, Dr. Fuller, from your perspective, fuse these different elements of the black community, taking into account all of this experience that we've gathered, hopefully learned from, not only in the domestic context, but in the international context as well?
Yeah, it's always good to have an opportunity to talk to people who are on college campuses, because y'all bring up some very interesting questions and you make up difficult. But let me just try to respond in this way. The point I was trying to make was no national Black political party came out of Gary in 1972. And there were some of us who wanted that specifically to be done, but it wasn't done. But then when Little Rock occurred, and I think Little Rock occurred in 74, the effort to create that national Black political party did not go away. And so you're correct, obviously, that at a certain point in time, a national Black independent party was in fact created. But when you start talking about Jesse, I mean, Jesse was up there talking about NationTime and everything in 1972 and condemning the white Republicans and the white Democrats. But when he decided to run for office, he did not run for office as a Black independent. He wanted to get the Democratic Party nomination. And I think that was because of the realization that independent parties, no matter what color they are, have had limited impact in America. And so I think that without, and this is no casting no shade on anybody, I think the vast majority of people who are in elected political office today are in either one of the parties, because it's those parties that have the apparatus that allows them to get elected. And while on a local basis, there are some what you would call nonpartisan elections, like for school boards and so forth, the tendency still is that you have to lean one way or another in order to get the kind of support that you need to be elected. So I think that the issue of how do Black people pursue any kind of independent agenda within the context of American society is going to always be a contentious struggle. And so what I think most of us end up doing who actually care about Black people as Black people, you're trying to figure out how do you advance an agenda for our people within the context of institutions and structures that were never set up for us to be successful. And so I think it's that I live with that contradiction every single day of my life, that I'm trying to figure out how to help the kids in our school. You know, where do you get money from? What do you do? Well, how do you do all of that in America? And I try to at least be honest with myself in terms of the decisions that I'm willing to make and the contradictions that I'm willing to live with to try to advance some type of agenda or try to improve the lives of the children in our school and their families in some kind of way.
Do I have to start over? Start over? Oh, okay. All right. So good afternoon, Dr. Fuller. My name is Imani Price. I'm a junior political science major, Afro-American studies minor from the Bronx, New York. And although you kind of answered my question, I was just going to ask that, given the context of the American society in which Black people are always choosing basically between the lesser of two evils, where we have two political parties that don't really wholeheartedly support our own convictions, like specifically, like what would you say are the advantages of having an independent political party when people will push back and say like, oh, well, if you don't vote for either or of the major parties, you're wasting your vote. Like, what would you say are the advantages of having an independent Black party as opposed to simply just joining one or the other?
Yeah, Imani, that's an excellent question. And I honestly think the question would be, what methodology, including institutional arrangements or organizations, which method would allow us to put the most pressure on the American body politic writ large to get some of the things that we need as a people. Because I could see how you could make an argument that if we were to form a Black independent political party and we had a very clear Black agenda, would we even be in a better position to get the various people who are in power to respond to us? I mean, I could see a strategy that says, I'm not saying we should do this, but I could see a strategy that says we withdraw, we empower ourselves, and then we negotiate with the existing powers from a different vantage point, as opposed to being up inside of their parties trying to negotiate. And I'm sure that, you know, people like Cory Booker and people like that who are functioning today within the Democratic Party, they could clearly, and I actually know Cory and respect him, they could clearly make an argument that the best possibility for getting something done is to do it within the context of that party, and that's where they can get the most out of the political structure for our people. But I could see you making an argument that another strategy would be, and I'm not saying people should do this, but to withdraw, form an independent Black political party that would in essence then be the entity that would negotiate with either parties for the interests of our people. I could see a strategy like that. I don't know how successful it would be.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller. We're going to transition now to our panel. But before we do, just for the record and make sure, because this is Howard University and we look forward to having you in person soon, that African Liberation Day and all of that work, of course, not only a DC story, but a Howard University story, as we know, because memory serves me correctly, some of that work actually took place not only on this campus, but in this building. Or am I misremembering?
No, you're absolutely right. And then the Road Forward Conference, which took place in 1974 at Howard, is another big entity that people never really talk about, but that took place on Howard's campus. And when we were organizing for ALD, the Howard radio station broadcast all of that live, on that day. And so Howard University was directly related to ALD, and then to subsequent meetings that took place after that, in particularly the Road Forward, which took place in 1974.
All right, you all, let's have a round of applause for Baba Owusu-Dusudeki, Dr. Howard Fuller. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Baba. We'll see you soon for part 2, where you can walk us through that history, because there's a baton we need to pick up in that regard. Appreciate you.
It's all good. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I'm going to ask my friend, longtime friend and dear colleague, Lisa Crooms Robinson, to come, Professor Robinson from the School of Law. And we are going to ask the panelists for part 2 of our work together to join us. And in fact, we will introduce them one at a time, but if y'all want to come up as a collective, we can kind of get this moving. We started about 10-15 minutes after thank you, after time, but we're right about in time. So I don't know, Professor Crooms Robinson, if you want to introduce our panelists. I see our fearless leader here, the director of the Ron Walter Center, coming on, Dr. Elsie Scott. Y'all give her a round of applause. And look, a day over 10 years old, but I don't know if you want to introduce.
Good afternoon. Is this on?
Yep.
Okay, well, y'all ready? I guess I should take this off. Ooh, we still mask on West Campus, so y'all making me kind of nervous, but I'm a trust on this one. To my far right, your far left, more appropriate since she's to the left of y'all, is none other than Dr. Elsie Scott, the director of the Ron Walter Center. Next to Dr. Scott is Justina Blanco, senior political science. You got a lot of stuff going on. It's like political science. There we go. Yep. And we also have Dr. Joe Leonard, who, received his PhD in 2004 and currently serves as our Assistant VP of External Affairs, and was the former Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Rainbow Push Coalition. So, since Dr. Carr told me to go first, let me go first. 2 points. Well, 1 point and then one question. The point, I really appreciated the fact that Dr. Fuller put the Gary Convention in a much broader historical context that took you all the way back to the colored conventions in the 19th century. And I want to recommend to people, if you've not, in fact, seen it, Dr. Gabrielle Foreman's book. And it's a book, multimedia sort of thing that walks you through all of those conventions that give a lot more texture to our understanding of the level of organizing around freedom, citizenship, and in some cases liberation happening during the antebellum period. Because often folks believe that we weren't organizing or concerned until we were emancipated, but being at Howard, we all know that that's a false narrative, right? But I really appreciated that. That being said, Dr. Scott. Dr. Fuller called it a travesty with respect to Shirley Chisholm. And we know that the second wave feminists also threw Shirley Chisholm under the bus when it came down to it. I'm wondering about your reflections about, I mean, really, we rarely ask questions about how people feel, right? But how did you feel being in that place and watching those events sort of unfold, especially since you had members of the Congressional Black Caucus there, so it couldn't be that she was running for the Democratic nomination. Perhaps it was something else.
Question. Okay, before I answer the question, may I just ask the technicians, we're supposed to have another panelist that's zooming in. Did we ever find him? Okay. He wants to still listen, I think, but he's not part of the discussion. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that question, but let me just first say that I may be one of the only people in the room that was a delegate to the convention. You know, I just acknowledged that for the 50th anniversary. I just came out that I was at old. But I was lucky to be a delegate from Washington, D.C. I had come here from graduate school and taken a position at Federal City College. And and my students pushed me out there to run for a delegate, and I got quite a few votes citywide. So next thing I knew, I was going to Gary. But I think Doug Moore was our leader, and Fauntleroy, because he was elected official, was, you know, one of our leaders also. But I think I ran on Doug's slate for a delegate. No, Clay is still, yeah. Clay is still here and very living. Okay. All right, Shirley Chisholm. In our delegation, the question about Shirley Chisholm running for president was really not an issue, surprisingly enough. You know, when I think back on it all these years later, that we never discussed that in our delegation. We were busy fighting over, well, one of the big things was were we going to go on the record as a supporting black political party. Most of the people in our delegation wanted a black political party. We came there sort of with that agenda to do the black political party. But I think some people felt like Shirley Chisholm hurt herself by not coming out there, because they think that if she had been in the face, that at least us women would have could become knowledgeable and say, okay, we want to go on the record for Shirley. And other people feel like, if not just the women, but other people, they definitely would have supported, even if we didn't think that she could win, we would go on record, since this is our unified black nation meeting together in Gary, that we would have been shamed to go back and say we were not supporting Shirley Chisholm. And so after she made the decision not to come, I think she hurt herself with the black community that was out there, because I think that we would not have voted against supporting her for president.
Long time, so you can go right ahead. She in the rhythm. See, that's a college professor right here. And then we'll start opening it up. So y'all got some questions.
Okay, so I'm just gonna move on down the line, and I'm gonna pose to you one of the questions that you posed. And in your estimation, what kind of changes would have to happen in order to form an independent black political party in the 21st century?
Right. Yes. Yes. All right. So I think that's a really interesting question, because the idea, and I posed it. Yeah. Yes. And an independent black political party is something I've thought a lot about, and it's something that I do really, really want. But I do think that a lot would have to change for us to get to a place where we could have that, because right now, as a community, the kinds of conversations and arguments we're having are not around being independent, right? And so I think that kind of unity requires a unity a lot earlier on. And something that I think about is, I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, so right nearby. My Black history education did not happen in Prince George's County Public Schools. The amount that I learned when I got to Howard, and my mother, she did educate me well. She's in the audience. But that wasn't happening within the school. And the amount that I learned by just coming onto Howard's campus was just incredible. And I think about that so much because they're so close by. My high school is like 30 minutes away. And so if you were to ask a lot of my classmates about an independent Black political party or about Black nationalism, I don't think that they would be able to respond, right? And I think that this narrative of we need the Democratic Party, of that we need the security of that party, I don't think that's being challenged early on, because they don't have any frame of reference. The Gary Convention, we didn't know about that. We didn't know that we even tried to form a Black political party. And so how do we know that that's possible? And so education is something that I think a lot about in terms of that issue, right? But in general, creating a better relationship with Black nationalism. Black nationalism, I think, is still a term that people rebel against. And I think that that has to do with a lot of the fear-mongering that's been done around that word. But what does it mean to come back to ourselves? What is the value in coming back to ourselves? What are the potentials of actually being able to speak as a people and engage as a people? Because I'm really interested in the idea of a Black political party in terms of a coalition that may need to vote for a Democrat, but it doesn't mean we have to be Democrats. And so I think that we need to build a better relationship with ourselves, and that starts with beginning that process a lot earlier, before we hope that some of our Black children go to HBCUs.
Okay, I have a follow-up question for you, and then I'm coming to you. And the follow-up question really is, since you outed yourself as being a PG County resident, right, do you think that the political power of Black people in PG County is in any way linked to, or, possible only because of, let's say, Gary, because it seems that PG County operating at a county level made a fairly significant transition from what it used to be to what it is now.
This is another really interesting question. Prince George's County, as it exists today, was born around that same time, right? Like, white flight. Like, if I looked in my yearbook at the 70s, we still had a whole bunch of white people, right? Look at my yearbook now, and like maybe 3%. And so that transition was happening during that time. So I don't know about a direct link, but I would imagine that there probably is one, because politics in Prince George's County is very black, and continuously, so at every level within Prince George's County. And being within that microcosm, I think that you would think there'd be an increase of black nationalism, but ironically, you don't need it because everybody is black. So those kind of conversations don't really happen, and we are still pretty classic black liberals just within a black space. And so I wish there were more like ideological connections, but I'm sure that there are historical connections as PG was transforming during that time.
And being good to my word, or keeping my word. Rainbow Push Coalition and Reverend Jackson at that point in time. I'm wondering if, for the folks who are out here and weren't necessarily either alive or were too young to remember the Rainbow Push Coalition as a force. Did you see any of the sort of flash of Reverend Jackson and quoting Amiri's NationTime, right, as part of the work that Reverend Jackson undertook with respect to Rainbow Push?
Before I answer the question, I really am excited about the number of students that are here. I'm very excited, and I loved your comments saying that once you got to Howard, you were able to receive the training that you needed to do, to get to receive. You spend some time around Dr. Carr or Dr. Hussein, you're going to get what you need. You know what I mean? You will come out different. And that's why, and I was looking at the audience, and Dr. Pierre was one of my interns. I remember when I was a PhD student here and worked for the Black Leadership Forum after I left Rainbow Push, and Dr. Haidt hired me, and Dr. Pierre got to be there. I put out a call for interns. Nobody showed up but Dr. Pierre. And to those students, I want to say, hang around the Dr. Rouse and the Lisa Crooms. You'll be surprised where you are 20 years from now. You'll be surprised how your thoughts are sharper. So when you ask me about Reverend Jackson, it makes, I see how he evolved from that statement he made to where he was in 84 and 88. I see how a piece of black nationalism also never left him. One of the most important things that he's probably done that people don't know about is in 1996, he was going to run for president again. I don't know that. Why was he going to run for president? Of course, at that time, Bill Clinton is president. He won in 92, and he's going to run again. But a little known story is that there was a strong conversation, and of course Dr. Walters was involved in it, that Bill Clinton was considering dismantling affirmative action. Reverend Jackson said, I will run against you and give you one hell of a primary if that's what you want to do, because Clinton was a DLC Democrat. DLC Democrats, what's it called? Democratic Leadership Council. And it was a very conservative, they call him Blue Dogs, but he's a very conservative Democrat. And he didn't run. But what's important now that it could have been dismantled in 1996, but now it's up against the Supreme Court this year. He was able to address it in his spirit of Rainbow Push. He pushed it on for another 26 years. But when I think of Dr. Carr, Clarence Hussein, and yourself, I think, and Dr. Scott, I think of them as freedom fighters. And that Reverend was able to run his race, and now he's handing the baton off to you all to defend it and or redefine it. You see what I'm saying? You've run the race. So I see all of the kind of, I see how that younger Reverend evolved into 84, 88. He was a part of the Black political movement, and there was a huge discussion with Dr. Walters and others whether they should stay or whether they should try internally to get what is needed for Black people in America. And Dr. Hussein is absolutely right, and we'll probably get in there later. Changing the Democratic Party processes for superdelegates, ended up ushering in Barack Obama.
Can I ask a quick question for?
I got one more question on my hand.
Then you go, you got it. And then y'all, and then we come into y'all and say.
Right, and this is, we've gone back, forward, forward. This is going back just a tiny bit, and that is to Lowndes County, Alabama in 1965. Right, and the birth out of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, the original Black Panther Party, and the extent to which that helped perhaps to set the stage and make it clear that what had gone forward as the civil rights movement, my opinion, overly focused on the idea of integration and equality, was then challenged out of a county with voting age population about 85% Black, plurality of Black women, with the idea that that was about freedom and independence and self-determination, not necessarily about integration, and the extent to which that organizing coming off of what had happened in Mississippi and the travesty at the Atlantic City Democratic National Convention, wondering how that then is related to, if at all, the effort that we see manifested in Gary with respect to the Black Political Convention. And that's for anybody.
You said a lot, but I think it kind of leads into the question that you asked Ms. Blanco as well. I think if you are going to do a national party, Black political party, I think that's one of the better examples. One, it should be local first. It should absolutely be local first, potentially regional within the state, in order to make demands of the state. And then it can grow beyond that. Lowndes County was interesting because Lowndes County actually had a high degree of Black people who owned their own land. They owned their own land. They were economically free to a degree of the white power structure. So it's that sort of empowerment that gave rise to them going beyond the request. Not only did they ask for, they did in a way ask for the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, But the other thing that they requested, demanded, and which I've always embraced, and everybody here has always embraced, but it's not really embraced as much by our people. They demanded Black history be taught in schools. And today we have an issue with people being woke or not, or what they want in the history books. That's always been a problem for folks. Because like you said, if you don't know, you don't know. But when you're trained, you're different. And then what I know every person in school, this room is going to do is pass it on another generation. So I say that to say Lowndes County is the model to a degree for what could be in Prince George's County in 2030. And one of the things, and I do have a copy of the agenda, is they demanded more of their leaders in that county. And you could not get voted as a leader in that county if you didn't subscribe to certain things. And you had to sign a document. You had to sign a document, or you were not legitimate in their eyes. So a Democrat or a Republican could run, but you didn't have the imprimatur of the Black community. You know, I hope I'm making sense to y'all. So the young people looking at me like, I'm not sure what he's talking about, but at least some of them are shaking their heads. But I think that's kind of a start. Spirit actually, and we didn't coordinate this, so this is perfect. Whether it be Lowndes County Freedom Organization in Alabama, the Freedom Democrats in Mississippi, we'll raise the name of Charles Sherrod, who just made transition. He and his wife Shirley Sherrod in Albany, Georgia, the co-op movement. You know, during the 70s and that period, there was a bumper sticker. It was all over. Think globally, act locally. Right? And when we heard Dr. Fuller mention those three issues, the second of the three was the critique of the United States, Israel, and South Africa. Bob Starks, who was shown there briefly, his sister-in-law just made transition, Ethel Minor, of course, who is famous for having edited 1967 the SNCC position on Palestine that allegedly got all the funding dried up. I was there at the 50th anniversary of SNCC when she was like, I didn't mean for that to happen. I love SNCC, and everybody busts out laughing. But the reality is you cannot touch U.S. foreign policy. That's the third rail when it comes to our people, and that was very much prominent in Gary in 72. The question for anyone who wants to take this on, in the context of this local empowerment, in a time when they always linked the global to the local, how do we do that today when we face a Black American politics that is in many ways nativist? Regardless of what we want for Black people in the United States, when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, these Negroes don't open their mouths and line up and salute. And that's very much against not only the spirit of Gary, but the spirit of the times. Anybody have any?
I think, you know, one of the interesting things, the reason I was happy that Howard Fuller joined us today, because a lot of people don't know that his role in the development of the African liberation movement. And when I was doing research on Dr. Fuller and putting together his bio, there's a bio of him on the Howard University Founders Library page. And when I pulled it out, Dr. Lusane, and I said, you know, I had to go beyond Howard because they didn't mention his African liberation movement. And so they didn't mention Gary. They didn't mention Malcolm X. And so they just talked about his education. Back. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, one good thing back in that period around the Gary time, that we became connected with our African brothers and sisters like we had never been before. And so I got him, that's when I first met Dr. Fuller, when he was doing the African Liberation, and I joined the African Liberation Support Committee. But we became very much engaged in the fight for our brothers and sisters in Africa. And even though many of us did not feel that that we would ever see the liberation of South Africa. We were still out there fighting for the liberation of South Africa. We were talking about get rid of Rhodesia and all of that, you know. And so when I went to graduate school at Atlanta U, I had professors who were very much into that also. Mac Jones, some of you might have heard of him. And so we got involved in it even fuller than that, because then, you know, we got involved in South American politics, Walter Rodney. But it seems like now we're not engaging our students in the international movements like they were when I was in school. And I'm glad you brought out also that at the Gary Convention, that one of the things that almost tore up the convention was the whole Palestine-Israel issue, because there were people there that came there that were determined that we would not say anything negative about Israel. And then there were other people who felt like we can't leave here without calling Israel out. And so at one point, the convention almost broke up. But Imari Baraka was determined that we will keep the convention together for that period of time at least. That we were going to leave there with this whole unity without uniformity. And that's what we did. And one little known fact that I want to also mention, that on was the first day of the convention? It was the first or the second day of the convention. And Jesse Jackson was scheduled to speak. But we had almost nothing but speakers all day. And we had come out there for action. We didn't come out to hear a lot of speeches. And Jesse Jackson was the next speaker up. And so DC, we almost got kicked out, because it wasn't anything against Jesse Jackson. It was just that we had been listening to speakers, and we were ready to get in small groups and look at how we're going to get this job done. And so the DC delegation jumped up, no more speeches, no more speeches. But it was Jesse Jackson coming up, so other people look at us, no, sit down, DC. Y'all don't even have the right to vote. Oh, no, that's what they said. But we did come out, but they did come out of the convention with support for DC statehood. Of course, you see, we are still there now, and that's the next session I want to have here from the Ron Walter Center. I want to have, because I don't know whether Howard has ever had a session on supporting DC statehood. I got to do some research. Maybe somebody can help me with that. Yeah, his book was, but that's part of the reason why I want to do that, because his last book, and I've already talked with Michelle, who wrote the book with him, about doing that. But I also want to bring in city government, because Howard is sitting here. Why haven't we really rallied to bring about statehood here? And so that's something we have to do. When Walter Fauntroy was the delegate here in DC, he mobilized Howard students on weekends to go down to South Carolina to run, what was the guy name? It was the head of the DC. No, the guy who was the chairman of the DC, they had a DC committee. And he was against no, I have to look it up. I think pretty certain he was South Carolina. He might have been North Carolina, but I think he was South Carolina. Oh, you mean the Senate? No, he was in the House. He was chair of the House Committee on District. And we didn't even have too much statehood at that, home rule at that time. And we mobilized, and he would take buses of Howard students on a weekend, and they would go down until those people, the black people down there, decided that they wanted to kick this guy out of office, and he was thrown out of office.
The reason I'm asking, if y'all want to respond, I don't want to miss this opportunity, though, particularly for the young people and anybody watching Howard students. Do you take interns like to come and give them research assignments, like looking at all that stuff? Because it seems to me like, all right, y'all know this is the Ron Walter Center. I'm just putting it out there. You heard what Dr. Leonard said. This is your chance right now. Some of them looking like, yeah, I want to look that up, right? Because that sounds like, hey, it's been a long time since I don't bus with Howard students. Macmillan, see, just gave her a minute so she could remember it. It's been a long time since Howard students got me on the bus to go. They took me to Tuskegee one time for this conference. I'm like, man, my back is hurt. Nation of Islam, it was Farrakhan and all them down there. And anyway, this is being recorded, right? But the point is this. Y'all should be getting on some buses now. I'm a little too old, but Dr. Pierre young. She just got here. She'll ride that bus, Brooklyn. Where Brooklyn at? We might even need some people to Haiti, don't we, Dr. Pierre? Because the United States interfering with them, and the Congressional Black Caucus just lined up behind them. So anybody else? Yeah, let's go. Let's go right now. Anybody got their hand up? You want to? Yes. Okay, you got one? And then you got our brother Sean Ali back there. Mickens? Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead.
No disrespect.
Yeah.
Stand up.
For the people watching.
Oh, I look so bad. Okay.
Don't look beautiful.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nessa Ajware. I'm a first-year political science major from Boston, Massachusetts. And my question just went back to the fact that you said there isn't as much student engagement now as there was back then. And I wanted to ask you all how you felt about how we fixed the lack of like multi-generational activism collaboration, like in the Black community in general.
All right. That's a interesting question. I'm gonna say that every time. So how do we increase multi-generational engagement? I think, and someone said this recently at the Black Writers Festival. I'm forgetting her name. Dr. Rock, maybe you can help me. But she was talking about the importance of a political home, and Derek Purnell, and she talks about the need for Howard to have a political home. And so I mentioned that because I think that in order to have multi-generational engagement, we have to have a multifaceted movement. Because young people obviously have the ability on a lot of different levels to engage in protests, right? And do, right? But how do we engage in protests as a part of a larger movement, which is a question that I know a lot of older people ask about Black Lives Matter, right? And so how do we create a system where protest is a product of engaging with people who were at protests in earlier generations, who can inform those protests? How do we normalize engagement outside of protests? Because I know for a lot of us young people, a lot of our political engagement involves protests, involves petitions, but where involves education in a formal sense, but where is that community that allows people who can and cannot protest to engage in how we act? What are the other forms of engagement, and how do we build those bridges? And I think places like Howard are a big part of that, but that has to mean creating a space where professors, where people who work at Howard can engage with students in a way that can be built into how we live here. Because I know a big issue for students at Howard in terms of getting involved formally in organizations like that is time. I don't know a Howard student whose schedule isn't packed. And so how do we build that into the way that we exist at Howard? Maybe that's curriculum, maybe that's a department conversation, but how do we make it as accessible as possible for professors and students to engage with each other and let the product of that be these shows of political action, right? And engaging with local politics through that. And like you were saying, engaging in DC politics, I think, is a huge way of creating a political home here.
You know, it's funny, when I was younger, I used to think that what you said, that not students aren't engaged, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. The older I get, I remember one time I asked Reverend Jackson why he hired me. And he said, I hire people who they gonna do it anyway. It just pours out of them. You ever seen little kids, they'll be preaching, they may be preaching to some dolls. It just pours out of them. As I've gotten older, I think that the older generation needs to do a better job of identifying those young people who it's just coming out of. You know what I mean? Who are going to do it whether you know them or meet them anyway. You know? So I think it's not on the young people, it's on those, the Dr. Harrises, like the people that I've talked about, the way it came out of them. Dr. Scott, all these people, these freedom fighters here, we've got to do a better job of identifying you all. You see what I'm saying? Identifying the same traits that we have in ourselves, that we see in you all, and let you all know, and not wait for you to come to us.
Okay, there we go. My name is Sean Ali Waddell. I'm a senior political science major from Louisville, Kentucky. I was listening, and I heard it mentioned a few times up here that to really cultivate political power, we should concentrate our focus on the local and state level to build power. I'm thinking about the context of where I'm from. I'm thinking about education. I'm thinking about the level of engagement that just seems to exist among our people regarding politics as a whole. And it seems to be a bit shallow for a lot of younger folks, boring, not worth their time because they don't feel like they know about it. And I thought about a quote from Brother Malcolm when he said that the greatest fault of the movement was organizing sleeping people around the cause before waking them up. And it just made me think, like, what is the step? What needs to happen to get our people's minds ripe on a mass level in areas where it's not so? Like my bro here, he's not from Howard. He's from Louisville, and he came up here with me, and like we've just been talking with some of our friends from bigger cities where I don't know, there's just a different context of how it flows. Like in spaces where a lot of people aren't thinking about politics or even seeing themselves as active agents of change. It's something over there. How do we make that bridge and make that change?
Okay. So I'm going to acknowledge that my answer has to be put in context because I am somebody who cares a lot about politics and has always cared a lot about politics. So what I would imagine would need to happen is connecting politics to their lives. And for Black people, I think that this link can be made really efficiently because to be Black in America is political. And to be Black in America is a challenge, something that is constantly, you're being incentivized to give up parts of who you are to participate in America. And so if we can build that relationship with Blackness like that I was talking about and make that explicit, right? Because I think a lot of Black people understand this fight and understand holding on to themselves in their particular experience. But what does this look like as a people? What does this look like as a community? And what does that look like in policy? And those are the kind of policies that I feel like touch people and can galvanize people. I'm thinking about like the Crown Act and movements to protect Black people's hair. That's something that every Black person knows what that's like. Every Black person knows that issue, right? But how do we make issues around education, around health, that real, that much like to hold on to yourself, you need to engage in this. And a part of engaging in this is going to help you hold on to yourself. How do we make that a value? How do we incentivize that in a world where that has been made so difficult? And actually, we're incentivized to constantly give that up. And so that, I think, begins in a home and building a relationship with Blackness. And I thought a lot about what kind of platform would be most effective for Black people to build that kind of relationship, because we could talk about the church, we could talk about the home, we could talk about schools. And I think that yes to all of those, and making all of those political because Blackness is political. And I think that again, I would imagine that for people who aren't necessarily interested in politics, a lot of their existence is politicized and political. That's just not how they would necessarily think about it. So how do we build literacy in terms of Black politics and how it exists in our everyday lives? Because I do believe that it does.
Okay, we have time because we're trying to be respectful of folks' time, and we said we would end when we were going to end. So we have time for one more question, and no pressure, no pressure. I see you with your Post-its. Go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Ramai Davis. I'm from DC and I'm a television and film production major. My question is, what is the formula of studying Afrocentric history that y'all used back in the late 60s or 70s, or like just throughout history from before I was born, to cultivate such a rich understanding of what at the time helped get Black people where they are now? And I'm asking this because I've always had an interest and a focus on doing what I can to help Black people get to liberation, and I'm really interested in making curriculum around education for high school students in DC or like all over eventually, to kind of understand who they are, black students, who they are, where they come from. And I always seen the Black Power era as an area of history that showed real connection to ancestral things, and also understanding who they were to even just put themselves in so much risk politically, socially, and economically during that time. So that's my question for you all.
Most PhDs I know and most scholars I know were avid readers, and they read the majority of the books they read. They were never assigned. They were reading because they had to know, and that will guide you. You know, you just want to know. You read something and it'll lead you to something else, and it's like the ultimate crossword puzzle. And you realize that you're entering a program because it's like an organized thing, but it's not. You're not really doing it for the degree. You're doing it for your own self-knowledge and your own ability to pass it on. And again, it goes back to that because you have that in you. You just want to know yourself. You know what I mean? And it's and to just go back really quickly to your question, it's because it's, and that's the same spirit. Howard is filled with a place of people who wanted to come here to know, like really know. So that's why you have in the more fertile grounds of HBCUs in the country, not, you know, most HBCUs, but those people who have to get it out find them each other. And you'll find a cohort in grad school, and you'll find all of these, and so I'm your question is going to keep me up tonight, I promise you, because you're right. Outside George Floyd, in the lull periods, how do you keep people's spirit high? How do you keep people engaged? You know what I mean? Not just being reactionary. How do you proactively, through reading and other things, like continue to foster the movement? That's a almost curse. That's a heck of a question, and that's the question that future leaders like you all should be pondering now. Do you know what I mean? You're preparing yourself for the moment, even asking that question. Do you understand? And it's a moment that's going to be 5 to 10 or 20 years away. But because that you're trying to focus on a curriculum for a school now, you're just 10 to 15 years away from your own charter school. Do you know what I mean? And you're constructing your moments, but it comes with, you know, you make yourself. It's coming out of you, but you have to train yourself to do it. And you have to, because steel sharpens steel, you have to utilize these professors in the room to sharpen your skill. So when you meet that moment, you're more than able, prepared to assist the race.
Thank you. Nope, sorry. I learned how to chair a meeting from Amiri Baraka. Nope, not gonna happen. So, but we invite everyone here to join us in the hallway for refreshments and further conversation. I want to invite Dr. Leonard to make closing comments on behalf of Patricia Walters, and then Dr. Scott to make closing comments on behalf of the center, and with that, we will then wrap it up.
Appreciate the questions, and thank you so much, Dr. Scott, for inviting me. My closing remarks are from the Walters family. I've been blessed, and I keep talking about steel sharpening steel. I met Dr. Walters in 1995 until his passing. He was a mentor on my dissertation committee. There wasn't anything I didn't do in this city without calling or working with him. So I'm so happy that Pat Walters asked me to make this the closing remarks from the family. And what I'm going to relay to you is what happened 20 years ago. Happened to be with Dr. Walters. I think you might have, were you there, Natalie? And Gary? And he was showing us this. This is the agenda everybody is talking about, the black political agenda. And we were there with Reverend Jackson and others, and he was talking about it. It must have been about a 30 or 40-minute conversation. I hope I don't get too emotional. And at the end is what he read, and I want to read it to you this evening. And I told Pat Walters I would read it. Dr. Walters had a strong hand in constructing this. It has a huge DC plank in it. It has a huge black farmer plank in it that I end up working with at USDA. It is an important historical document. And he flipped to the very last page. Then we were sitting there. I was just at awe. Grown man just at awe at his feet. And he said, always remember this. Always remember this. And he read it to us. And what he read is, to those who say that such an agenda is visionary, utopian, and impossible, we say the keepers of the conventional white politics have always viewed our situation and our real needs as beyond the realm of their wildest imagination. At every critical moment of our struggle in America, we have had to press relentlessly against the limits of the realistic to create new realities for the life of our people. This is our challenge at Gary and beyond. For a new black politics demands new vision, new hope, new definitions of the possible. Our time has come. These things are necessary. All things are possible. You have to know, as young people, all things are possible. You have to truly, truly believe and feel that. You have to know that you're taking the baton from these faculty members. You have to believe it, and you have to run your race well. On behalf of the Walters family, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leonard, for that closing. And we really appreciate the Walters family and how they have been supportive of the Walters Center since we started the center. I would like to thank all of my colleagues. When I reached out to you, nobody turned me down, whether I was asking for money, whether I was asking for your time. So to all of my colleagues here at Howard, thank you. Thank you, students, for coming here. Thank you, Dr. Perry, for arranging for your class to be here. So I am so appreciative of all of you. But before I let you go and get something to eat, please stop and eat some of the food that we've paid for. I would like to just say one piece of history, that there was a gentleman who was supposed to join the panel, and we tried to link him in from Phoenix, Arizona, named Alan Warwick. And he was a student here. He graduated in the class of 1975. And he was a student here when the Gary Convention happened. And so you can go back and read some of this history in the Hilltop, that the Howard students decided that they were going to take over Ward 1 in terms of the delegates to the Gary Convention. And so they had a big turnout of Howard students, and they won all of the seats to go to Gary. And some of the ladies who had been activists out there in the community for many years, they were very, well, I won't just say ladies, but they were the ones who were very vocal. They were very upset that the Howard students had taken all the seats. And they thought it was disrespectful. And some of the Howard students basically said, if you had turned out the people from your community, you would have had the delegates. You know, it got kind of bad, but there were, Elijah Cummings was a member of the student body at that time. And so some of them decided that they would give a few of the seats back. And so that's what happened. They did a compromise. And so I was really hoping that he would be here today because he was part of the group that came. He was not a delegate, he told me, but he was part of the group that went to Gary, and he was from Gary. And he served as sort of the official guide to go there. But maybe we can get his story and put it in writing or something and share it with you. But Howard students, I wasn't saying that Howard students haven't been active. You've always been active, and you continue to be active. And I never will forget the night, and I think Greg Carr had something to do with this, right after Ferguson. And I had just come over here to start working at the university. And the students, their first week here at Howard, their first things they did was pose for a big picture out there in solidarity with the people of Ferguson. And then they took a whole group out to Ferguson. So you continue to be activists, and that's the reason why people want to come to Howard, because they hear that you are very active. So I want to thank all of my panelists for participating. I want to recognize Justina's mother out there, who's one of the great civil rights lawyers in this country. So you need to know who she is. And thank everybody who's made this 10 years I've been here at Howard. You've helped me to do it, because when I say I walked in here and all they handed me was a resolution from the Board of Trustees and said, create an institution. And for 10 years, you know, I've struggled here, but I think we've done some good things here at Howard in recognizing the legacy of Dr. Ron Walters. And those of you who don't know about Ron Walters, pick up a book and read about him. And his biography, written by Robert Smith, will teach you a lot, not just about him, but about the whole struggles, the Black Power movement, etc. So thank you very much. Enjoy, continue to talk over the food. Thank you very much.